You know, there's something really interesting I want you to sit with for a moment. Most of us go through our days having this nonstop, running commentary in our heads. Sometimes it's helpful, but more often, it's critical, anxious, or just plain negative. That voice, that narration, it's not just noise. It's instruction, it's influence, it's shaping how we feel, what we believe, and ultimately, what we do. Think about it, the words we use when we speak to ourselves internally are not neutral, they carry weight. They trigger chemistry. They influence brain circuits in ways that literally change how we process stress, how we focus, and how we move through the world. It's not just about mindset in some vague motivational way. It's biological, it's neurological. The brain is listening. All the time. Let's say you mess up at work, or maybe you fumble something socially. The words that immediately follow that mistake matter more than the mistake itself. If you say to yourself, "Of course I did that. I'm such an idiot," you're not just expressing frustration. You're carving a deeper path into your brain that reinforces a narrative. I'm not capable, I mess things up, I don't belong. You keep repeating that over time, and your brain starts to operate as if those beliefs are facts, not possibilities. Facts. Now imagine a different response. All right, that wasn't ideal, but it's not the end of the world. I can fix it. I've handled harder things. That language sends a completely different signal. It activates neural pathways tied to problem solving, emotional regulation, and resilience. It tells the brain we're okay. We're adaptable. We're still in motion. That's the shift we're talking about. This isn't wishful thinking or positive affirmations written on sticky notes that you forget about a day later. This is about learning to speak to yourself in a way that aligns with how the brain actually works. Because if you're constantly telling yourself you're broken or behind or not enough, your brain will try to prove you right. It will filter reality through that lens. You'll start to notice every failure, every shortcoming, every rejection, because your inner language has already primed your brain to expect them. But the good news, the reverse is also true. When you begin to feed your brain language that supports growth, recovery, and self-belief, even if it feels awkward or forced at first, you start to notice opportunities instead of threats. You become more emotionally flexible, less reactive. Your entire outlook shifts, not because the world changed, but because the words you use inside your head changed. Here's where it gets really powerful. Your self-talk doesn't have to be long-winded. It doesn't have to be complicated. A few key phrases, spoken with consistency and sincerity, can literally reshape the way your brain functions over time. Something as simple as "I can figure this out," repeated in moments of stress, sends the brain into a state of active problem solving instead of panic. "I'm safe right now," said during anxiety, communicates calm to your nervous system. The language you use cues your brain into the kind of state it should be in. That means you can choose how you respond to life just by how you talk to yourself. 4 days of deliberate, conscious, intentional self-talk, done properly, and begin to recalibrate your internal environment. And once that starts, momentum builds. This is why I always tell people, be very careful with how you speak to yourself, especially when things go wrong. Because the moment something doesn't go as planned, your brain is wide open, trying to decide what to do next. That's the moment of opportunity. If you respond with criticism, you shut down. If you respond with calm, encouraging direction, you open up. You stay in motion. You stay adaptive. Most people wait for confidence to show up before they speak to themselves kindly. But that's backwards. The language creates the confidence. It creates the clarity. It creates the discipline. And it's not about lying to yourself. It's not about pretending everything's fine when it's not. It's about using accurate but empowering language that tells the truth, but in a way that points forward. This is hard, but I can handle it. I don't know everything, but I can learn. That's real, that's honest. And it builds strength over time. So, for just 4 days, try this. Watch your words like a scientist watches data. Interrupt the automatic negative spirals, replace them with language that supports who you're trying to become. Do it consistently, not perfectly, just consciously, because your brain is listening. And every word you say to yourself is either pushing you closer to growth or pulling you back into patterns that no longer serve you. And the moment you understand that, really understand it, you'll never speak to yourself the same way again. You know, one of the biggest shifts you can make, something that will completely change the way you experience your own life, is learning to replace criticism with compassion in the way you talk to yourself. Now, I don't mean you stop holding yourself accountable or let everything slide. I mean you stop beating yourself up under the false belief that shame or harshness is the path to growth. Because it's not. That's one of the biggest myths we've absorbed, that if we just push ourselves hard enough, criticize ourselves harshly enough, we'll finally become disciplined, successful, or worthy. But in reality, it works against us. See, your nervous system doesn't distinguish between self-inflicted stress and external stress. When you tear yourself down mentally, calling yourself lazy, stupid, weak, your brain responds the same way it would to a real external threat. It goes into fight or flight. Your focus narrows, your heart rate increases, cortisol spikes. And all of that makes it harder, not easier, to think clearly, to stay calm, to learn from the experience, or to take effective action. So let's look at what happens when you approach yourself with compassion instead. Imagine this: you make a mistake. Maybe you missed a deadline or said the wrong thing in a conversation. The voice in your head jumps in. But instead of the usual, "Why are you always like this?" or "You never get it right," something different happens. You pause and you say, "Okay, that wasn't my best moment, but I'm learning. I'm not the only one who's messed up. I can recover from this." Just those few words, spoken from a place of understanding rather than attack, completely change your internal chemistry. You reduce the fear response. You quiet the panic circuits in the brain. You open up access to the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for rational thinking and decision making. And suddenly, instead of spiraling, you're grounded. You're able to move forward with clarity. Self-compassion isn't about being soft. It's about being smart. It's one of the most effective mental tools we have for maintaining performance, resilience, and long-term motivation. But it takes practice, because many of us have developed the habit of turning on ourselves automatically. We've done it for years, it feels familiar, sometimes it even feels productive, but familiarity isn't the same as effectiveness. And it's not serving you, so here's what I want you to try just for the next few days. Start paying attention to the tone you use when you talk to yourself, especially in moments of stress or failure. Imagine for a second that a friend came to you, struggling with the same problem. Would you say to them the same things you say to yourself? Would you call them a failure? Would you tell them they always mess things up? Probably not. You'd encourage them. You'd remind them of their strengths. You'd say something that keeps them going, so why don't we do that for ourselves? Why do we think we have to earn our own kindness? Why do we think compassion has to be conditional, only given when we've done everything right? That model is broken, and it's time to replace it. When you start treating yourself like someone worth caring for, even in your low moments, you're not lowering your standards. You're creating the conditions necessary to meet them. And look, this isn't about pretending you're perfect. It's about being honest with yourself without being destructive. It's saying, "I missed the mark today, but I know I can do better tomorrow." That's growth. That's strength. And that's what allows people to make real, lasting change, not from a place of fear, but from a place of self-respect. I've seen this over and over in the data. People who develop a habit of self-compassion tend to recover faster from setbacks, are more persistent in their goals, and experience lower levels of anxiety and depression. Why? Because they're not draining all their energy on self-punishment. They're not constantly fighting themselves. They're using that energy to move forward, and the shift doesn't take months. It can begin in just a few days. 4 days of practicing compassionate self-talk, where you catch the inner critic and interrupt it, where you replace shame with encouragement, can start to rewire your brain toward a more stable, more sustainable inner environment. You start to build an emotional baseline that isn't so reactive, that doesn't collapse under pressure. That's what this is about, not pretending everything's fine, not ignoring mistakes, but learning how to respond to them in a way that actually helps. So, as you move through the next few days, every time you feel the urge to criticize yourself, pause. Ask, would I say this to someone I love? And if the answer is no, then don't say it to yourself. Say something that keeps you in motion. Something honest, something kind, something that gets you back on your feet, because that's what moves you forward. Speak to yourself like someone worth fighting for, because you are. One of the most powerful shifts you can make, one that rewires how your brain interprets possibility, is learning to speak to yourself as if the version of you you're trying to become already exists. Because in many ways it does. That future version of you, the one who is more focused, more grounded, more capable, it's not imaginary. It's a direction, a biological potential, and the way you talk to yourself determines whether or not you step into that potential. Most people wait until they feel like they've changed before giving themselves permission to speak differently. But the truth is, the language has to come first. That's how the brain begins to create the changes. You can't wait to feel confident before you talk like someone who is. You have to speak that confidence into existence first. Your nervous system responds to internal dialogue, to expectation, to belief, even before there's evidence. So the way you talk to yourself right now sets the stage for what you believe you're capable of becoming. Let's say you're trying to become more consistent, more disciplined. If every time you mess up you say, "This is just who I am. I've never been good at sticking to anything," your brain registers that as fact. It's not going to challenge you on it. It's going to adapt to it. But if instead you start saying, "Okay, that wasn't my best choice, but I'm becoming someone who follows through," you're giving your brain something entirely different to work with. You're queuing up the identity you want to grow into. This isn't pretending, it's not lying to yourself. It's naming a direction. Your brain is always organizing around identity. So if you speak from a place of becoming, "I am learning, I am adapting, I am growing into this," you're triggering brain pathways that help reinforce the identity you're stepping into. And here's the really fascinating part. Your brain doesn't wait for years to make those shifts. It begins responding almost immediately to the language and focus you bring to it. So much of our stuckness comes from using language that locks us into a past version of ourselves. We say things like, "I've always been this way," or "That's just how I am." And every time we say it, we reinforce it. We trap ourselves in an outdated blueprint, but you can update that blueprint with the language you choose. You can start saying things like, "That used to be my pattern, but I'm building a new one." That shift in language creates space for change. It lets your nervous system know we're not stuck. We're in motion. And this really matters when it comes to hard moments, the setbacks, the discomfort, the times when nothing feels like it's working. If you don't already have the language of your future self in place, those moments can send you spiraling. But if you've already been speaking from that future version, even before you fully feel like them, those hard moments don't define you. They become part of your process. You're able to say, "This is what growth looks like. It's not linear, but I know who I'm becoming. Let me give you something practical." Try this for the next 4 days. Start speaking to yourself from the perspective of the version of you who has already made the change. You don't need to act like everything's perfect. You just need to let your words reflect movement, not stagnation. Instead of "I hope I can do this," say "I'm doing this." Instead of "I don't know if I have what it takes," say "I'm developing what it takes." Small shifts in phrasing, but massive shifts in identity. This isn't magic, it's mechanics. Your words influence your perception of time and identity. When you speak from the place of your future self, your current actions start to align with that narrative. The brain begins to bridge the gap between where you are and where you want to be, not through pressure, but through alignment. It stops treating your goals like distant hopes and starts coding them as present, hence realities you're moving toward. And this is what makes the 4-day challenge so effective. When you start speaking from your future self consistently for just a few days, you begin to disrupt the old loops. You create cognitive dissonance between the outdated inner dialogue and the new one, and your brain responds by trying to resolve that tension, usually by pulling your behavior upward toward the higher standard you've been speaking from. You literally begin to act in ways that are more in line with that new identity. This is why what you say to yourself matters more than almost anything, because it's not just what you're saying, it's who you're saying it as. The voice in your head is either speaking from the past or from the future. One keeps you anchored. The other pulls you forward, and once you learn to consistently choose that future voice, everything changes. Speak from the version of you that's already on the other side. Your brain will follow. One of the easiest ways to start shifting your internal dialogue without overwhelming yourself or overthinking it is by using short, powerful phrases throughout the day. I'm talking about simple, clear statements that are easy to remember, fast to repeat, and immediately impactful. Because when it comes to changing your self-talk, consistency beats complexity every time. Your brain is constantly scanning your environment, both internal and external, trying to figure out how safe or threatened you are, how capable or helpless you feel, how much energy you should mobilize in a given moment. That scanning system isn't just responding to what's happening around you. It's responding to what you're saying to yourself about what's happening. So when you feed your mind short, stable phrases that reinforce calm, confidence, and clarity, you start anchoring your nervous system in the direction you want to go. Even if everything around you feels chaotic, these phrases act like internal cues, like mental switches. They're not magic words, but they're powerful because they work quickly and they're easy to access when your mind is under pressure. And that's important, because the truth is, in a high-stress moment, you're not going to remember a 10-step mindset framework. You're not going to suddenly recall an entire podcast episode or a chapter from a book. What you will remember, if you've practiced it, is a short phrase that you've rehearsed in calm moments and repeated with intention. That phrase becomes a neurological anchor, a verbal cue that triggers a different state in your body and mind. Let me give you a few examples. Phrases like "I've got this," or "I know how to reset," or "breathe, then move." These aren't elaborate. They're not meant to impress anyone. They're meant to stabilize you, to focus you, and when you use them often enough, they become automatic responses to stress or uncertainty. They become part of your internal toolkit. One that I often use personally and recommend to others is "one step at a time." It's deceptively simple, but incredibly effective. When you're overwhelmed by a goal, a conversation, a project, a decision, repeating that phrase slows things down. It tells your brain, we don't have to solve everything all at once. We just need to take the next step. And what's really interesting is how that kind of language immediately lowers activation in parts of the brain tied to anxiety and threat detection. Because when the brain hears one step, it feels manageable, it stops anticipating failure, it comes back to the present. Another one I like is, "This is what growth feels like." I use this when something's uncomfortable, when I'm doing something new, or I've just had a hard conversation, or I'm sitting in uncertainty. Instead of labeling those feelings as signs that something's wrong, I name them as evidence of forward movement. That's a powerful reframe. It helps your brain reinterpret discomfort as progress instead of danger. And when your brain believes discomfort is a sign you're doing something meaningful, it starts to tolerate more of it. It stays open instead of shutting down. Now here's the key. These phrases only work if you use them regularly, not just in crisis. If you want them to show up in hard moments, you need to rehearse them in calm moments. That means saying them in the morning, while you're walking, during transitions in your day. Not just when things fall apart, but when things are stable so that they're deeply wired by the time you need them. And this is where the 4-day challenge becomes a perfect container. For the next 4 days, I want you to pick 2 or 3 phrases that speak to the version of you you're trying to become. Phrases that center you, phrases that empower you, phrases that keep you in motion. Write them down. Put them on your phone. Repeat them throughout the day, not obsessively, not mechanically, but with intention. With presence, let your system feel the shift they create. You might feel a little silly at first. That's okay. Your brain is used to the old patterns, but the more often you repeat these new phrases, the more fluent they become. You'll start to notice yourself saying them automatically in moments of doubt or frustration. And that's when you know the rewiring is starting to happen. This is how self-talk becomes a habit, not by forcing big transformations overnight, but by embedding small, repeatable cues into your daily rhythm. And when those cues are short, powerful, and positive, your nervous system starts to trust them. They become signals of safety, signals of direction, and you begin to operate with more stability, more focus, and more control even in the middle of pressure. You don't need a library of mantras. You need a few strong ones that you actually use, that you live with, that you breathe into. And when you use them with consistency, just for a few days, you'll notice something subtle but profound begin to happen. Your baseline starts to shift. What used to knock you off center now just moves through you. What used to create panic now just calls for a breath and a reset. Because the words you planted are now shaping how you respond. Choose your phrases, say them like you mean them. Let them shape who you're becoming. There's something that happens when you start saying things out loud, not just thinking them, but actually speaking them into the world. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be performative. But the moment your internal dialogue becomes external, your nervous system starts responding differently. Because now you're engaging more of your brain. You're giving your thoughts structure. You're turning vague feelings into language, into direction, into something real you can work with. Most of us are carrying around a nonstop stream of inner noise, thoughts, judgments, reminders, doubts. But until you speak them out loud, they just swirl. They don't get clarified. They don't get challenged. They don't get organized. And what that does, neurologically, is keep you in a kind of background activation mode, where you're not fully anxious, but not fully calm either. You're constantly mentally juggling, but never fully processing. Now, I'm not saying you need to talk to yourself all day like you're narrating a documentary. That's not the point. What I'm saying is this: giving voice to your thoughts, especially in key moments, moments of transition, moments of stress, moments of decision, can create a major shift in how grounded and regulated you feel, because when you talk out loud, you slow your thinking down, you make it conscious, you create space between stimulus and response. Let's say you're about to start something important, maybe a workout, maybe a conversation, maybe writing that thing you've been avoiding. If you just sit there in your head, thinking about it, you might stay stuck in the loop of hesitation. But if you take a breath and say out loud, okay, here's what I need to do right now, you've just broken the loop. You've created a clear beginning. Your brain now has an action signal to follow. Or maybe you're in the middle of something hard. You're overwhelmed, you're frustrated. That's the exact moment to use your voice, not to vent or complain, but to ground yourself. Say something like, This feels hard, but I know I can figure it out. Or even just one thing at a time, one breath at a time. Say it. Don't just think it. Your voice carries weight, especially when it's your own voice saying something intentional and supportive. And the research backs this up. When you talk to yourself out loud using second person or first person affirming language, you activate brain areas involved in motivation, regulation, and executive function. You're literally engaging the parts of your mind responsible for planning and decision making. That's why talking to yourself isn't silly, it's strategic. It's a form of self-coaching, and when done consistently, it trains your system to default to clarity under pressure instead of confusion. There's something else that happens when you verbalize your inner dialogue. You gain a sense of agency. You move from being the one who's swept up in the thought to the one who's naming the thought. And once you name it, you have power over it. You can choose whether to follow it, redirect it, or let it go. That shift from being caught in your thoughts to speaking through them gives you space. And space is where self-regulation lives. Now, it might feel awkward at first. You might wonder if it makes you look a little strange. But I'll tell you this, high performers across fields, athletes, operators, artists, they do this all the time. They use their voice to drive state change, to shift gears, to reset after failure, or to lock in focus. Because they understand something most people miss. Self-talk is not just something that happens, it's something you can use. Try it for the next few days, not all day, not for every little thing, just in key moments. Before you start your day, say one thing out loud that sets your tone. Today I lead with clarity. Or I stay focused on what matters. During moments of stress, say something grounding. I've handled harder things than this. Or this isn't permanent. And in moments of doubt, use your voice to remind yourself of the direction. I'm building something, one step at a time. Say it even if you don't fully believe it yet. Say it because the act of saying it helps you believe it. That's how beliefs are formed, through repetition, emotion, and behavior. And when you speak something out loud with presence, you involve all three. You make it real to your nervous system. There's a kind of momentum that builds when your words and your actions begin to line up. You start to feel more congruent, more trustworthy to yourself, and that builds confidence, not the surface kind, but the kind that lives in your body, the kind that shows up under pressure. You don't need a perfect plan, you need a clear voice, one that tells you where you're going and reminds you who you are. Let that voice be heard, out loud, not someday today. There's something you need to understand about how the brain learns and adapts. It's not just what you say to yourself in big moments that matters. It's what you say after. After the mistake, after the setback, after the moment you wish you could have done differently. That's where most people either reinforce the old pattern or start creating a new one. And that's why this last piece is so crucial. You have to learn to talk to yourself in the after, because that's where identity gets shaped. Not in the wins, but in the moments where your nervous system is waiting for a signal. Do we spiral into shame, or do we move forward with intention? What happens for most people is automatic. Something goes wrong, they snap at someone, miss a deadline, break a promise to themselves, and the self-talk kicks in hard. Why do I always do this? What's wrong with me? See, I knew I'd mess it up. These are not throwaway thoughts. These are instructions. Your brain hears them as directives, and if they're repeated enough, they become beliefs. That's what we're trying to interrupt, because that part of you that wants to grow, it's never going to be perfect. You're still going to slip. You're going to revert back into old habits sometimes. But those moments don't have to define you. In fact, they can become some of your most powerful training if you respond with the right language. Language that reinforces movement, not judgment, curiosity, not criticism. Let's say something doesn't go your way. You didn't follow through the way you planned. You fell back into a habit you were trying to break. Instead of spiraling into self-attack, pause and ask yourself one clear question. What does this moment need to become a win in the long run? That alone shifts your brain out of threat mode. It tells your system, we're not collapsing, we're learning. And here's the part most people miss. The brain doesn't need the moment to be perfect in order to encode growth. It just needs a different response after. If you messed up and then you reframe it, reflect, and adjust with supportive self-talk, your brain now attaches new meaning to the experience. The memory becomes one of adaptation, not failure. One phrase I often use after something goes sideways is simple. Okay, that happened. What now? It seems small, but it's powerful. It grounds you. It separates what already happened from what still can. You're not ignoring the mistake. You're just not letting it narrate everything that comes next. There's a reason this matters biologically. The nervous system is always trying to create patterns it can rely on. And when it sees you meet difficulty with regulation, clarity, and forward movement, even if you're not feeling confident, even if you're still unsure, that becomes the new pattern. It learns, we don't spiral anymore, we reset, we recenter, we recover. That's a huge win, and the truth is, recovery is more important than perfection. The faster and cleaner you can recover from a misstep, the more resilient and adaptable you become. That's a real superpower, not never messing up, but knowing how to respond when you do. So for the next few days, I want you to watch how you talk to yourself after the hard moments. Don't just focus on your morning routine or your goals. Focus on what you say when things go sideways. Do you attack? Do you withdraw? Do you make it personal? Or can you pause, acknowledge what happened, and speak from the voice of your future self? That future version of you, the one who's consistent, focused, and grounded, they're not perfect either. But they've learned how to move forward without letting every setback rewrite the story. They've built a system of language that supports momentum. They've trained their mind to say, this is part of the process. Instead of this is proof I can't change, you're building that system right now. Not someday, today, in every choice you make after the slip. Every breath you take before responding. Every time you catch yourself about to spiral and instead say, no, we're going forward. Because here's the truth, talking to yourself differently is not about pretending everything's okay. It's about building a relationship with yourself that can handle everything, not just the highs, but the lows too. And when you do that consistently, even for a few days, you start to notice something. You trust yourself more. You respect yourself more. You believe in your direction even when the day doesn't go perfectly. This is where real change takes root. Not in the performance, but in the recovery. Not in avoiding failure, but in rewriting what failure means. So, when the next hard moment comes, and it will, just remember, how you talk to yourself afterward is the beginning of everything that comes next.